Well, last time I have told that optimum currency area model was basically showing that uh, well, there are some costs of uh, basically the um, the uh, not being that much integrated with the world economy. On this graph, actually, it shows economic shock absorbers. I mean, within the country, since the economy is integrated, there can be certain shock absorbers like labor mobility, fiscal transfers. I mean, transferring money where it is needed, flexible prices and wages. But those shock absorbers don't necessarily are there if at global level if labor mobility, fiscal transfers, and flexible price and wages don't exist in the world. I mean, all of them needs a lot of integration. Of course, business cycle correlation with currency union. I mean, the more you are integrated with the world economy, and currency union helps that integration, the more you will get more, you will sell more to the global economy. You will basically have more capital gains from the global economy, more labor going back and forth from and to other countries. So, uh, joining a optimum currency area or being more integrated in any other sense at the global level is benefiting you in that sense. If the benefits are more than the costs, in that case, joining to a global current economic well, optim well, a joint currency union or being integrated more with the current global economy is beneficial. But if you are not that much integrated at that point to the global economy, in that case, staying national, having the ability to uh, have some national institutions that give decisions according to national needs, um, and even if um, well, if you are not totally integrated, I mean, certain partial mobilities, for example, excessive financial mobilities might hurt your country. So in that case, I mean, to some extent, even restricting the mobility, some type of interactions that are when they are acting alone might be harmful. All of these things might benefit the country. So maybe I mean we have a continuous frontier here, and as you move further through this frontier, you basically the further integration at global level will become more beneficial, and when you go um, the other side through this frontier, then integration will become not anymore um, uh, beneficial for the country. Uh, if there is an integration, then the question will become, uh, well, how to set the common rules. I mean, leaving all integrations to the academic, the professional people, and having independent institutions. That might be, I mean, something that is desired, and to some extent, economically, countries might be forced to do that. The global institutions and global superpowers, especially at the top of the, if they can agree on this at least, they might just uh, make countries to access to the international funds and um, well, well, in some cases also, if the global capital can act together and basically only make investments to those countries have if they are following certain common rules of economic system. In that case, I mean, countries might be forced to follow rules. Especially the global corporations might, when they act together, even might have certain leverage against them, um, against even the most developed countries. That leverage, of course, exists for the global workforce, but in that case, the number of people who need to cooperate is much larger, and usually um, connection between them is not that high. But when you are aiming to build institutions that are built together with all whole world countries, in extreme cases, in future, maybe even the global population might create institutions independent of countries and build these laws, like EU to some extent is doing. Well, there can be certain laws be created. To some extent, those laws are there, um, created by usually United Nations and its agencies. Um, in many cases, those laws are what is called as soft law, and as opposed to hard laws that exist usually in a country. Soft laws are the laws that usually are setting certain principles and don't have consequences. For example, all countries, in principle, want promise to take actions to reduce the uh, global emissions, carbon emissions, for example. But you don't set a amount, you don't set a uh, testing uh, procedure and any kind of consequence if any country won't follow it. Similarly, it can be done that, for example, ILOs might say workers should not be treated as a commodity, and the safety of workers should be. Countries should have a program. If they cannot do it immediately, they should have a program to create uh, safe environments, safe workplaces in all sectors in the country, basically. But there are certain also soft laws, for example, regarding to children's right, what a parenting should be, and regarding to the seas, and there are many others. Um, International hard laws, I think there are some, but I don't remember it currently. Currently, um, there are some laws with some for example, the one example is of course, but that's actually kind of defining still nation sovereignty. But regarding to the seas and who has right to use the sea resources, there are some hard laws, um, basically. Um, but also the rules of the international sea space is also set by them by hard laws. So there are consequences and there are some definite rules. Uh, the function of soft laws is discussed a lot by all um, disciplines studying globalization. According to some views, soft laws are just you put them, you have sense of build certain rules to regulate the global economy. But since the people who don't obey to these rules don't face consequences, actually they are not functional, and basically they give you the false sense of having done something necessary. But according to another idea, at least it gives people an agreement on certain principles, uh, on different aspects of how global economy should be run. And those principles, once though they are agreed on, in future they can easily also be turned to the hard laws. And those principles might also, I mean, if they are, if all countries act honestly, maybe even without being hard laws, may guide certain national policies and at least let them to have certain progress uh, in the direction of the well, development and processes uh, required or suggested by the soft law. And then the question is the role of cooperation. I mean, to what extent the countries are able to follow rules and laws without a global cooperation that would actually help the countries that physically for which physically following those laws might be very costly. Famously, for example, IMF was the kind of acting like a global central bank, helping countries to fix their exchange rate when they run out of reserves. And the World Bank was also helping to the countries in terms of providing monetary resources for some fiscal policies, some stimulate certain sectors. And there are also other corporations that have different functions. We have already discussed IMF and World Bank and their functions. And we have also discussed, how IMF, their reluctance to lend the money, putting conditions for lending money to certain developing countries, has been interpreted by some developing countries as a neo-colonialism. As I said in previous lecture, the many nations were sensitive on sovereignty, the ability to set their own economic policies, that this IMF forcefully make them adopt certain economic policies. This is to lend the money condition, basically. This is considered as a violation of the sovereignty rights, although IMF claims in order to be able to pay my money back, you need to follow this principle. So if you don't have a strong economy, I cannot lend you money. Then you have ILO. We have also talked a little bit on ILO, which is actually setting labor-related policies, which is also an institution which helps to regulate labor-related policies and also gather data on them. Since we have also talked on this, I will spend a little bit more time on the World Trade Organization. The aim of which is basically building global environment which is more open to free trade, based on the idea that in the beginning of first half of 20th century, the countries' trade relations were shattered first by the economic crisis and then by the increasing regionalism and national, the aim to build national economies has harmed its environment. And World Trade Organization is built to aim to prevent these things to happen again. Actually, initially the institution was not there. Initially there was just a meeting which is called GATT, General Agreements on Tariffs and Trades, where different number of countries, first 23, then 12, means in Geneva and NSE to discuss tariff rates. Certain countries, for example, simultaneously agreed to decrease their tariff rates, while other countries, which were relatively less developed, were allowed to keep those tariff rates. In 1951 and 1956, again, two other GATT meetings have followed. They were started to call up to that point, not that way, but we would see that. And again, tariff rates were again discussed, and again, new agreements were made. Number of countries were 38 and 26. Now, after 1960s, it started to call the GATT rounds. So it is again, the meetings were in Geneva. First, 26 countries discussed tariff, and then something else has been added, and anti-dumping measures. This is the case when countries just dump a lot of, they might have a lot of products that are stored in their storages, and they dump instantly all of those products to the global market, aiming to decrease the price to very low values so that the industries in countries which have relatively less strength financial resources to aid them will go bankrupt because they won't be able to sell their products at these low prices, basically. So what measures can be done against this type of behavior? That was also discussed in 1964 between 1964 and 1967 by 62 countries. Now we will continue in the next part.